Robert Emmett Sherwood. He was born in 1896, April 4th, in New Rochelle, New York. Unlike Robert, who came from New England and came from a first family, but didn't have a nickel to rub together, but a lot of property, Robert Emmett Sherwood, on the other hand, had the great ancestry and the dough to back it up. His father was Arthur Murray Sherwood, broker, banker, and one of the original signers of what would eventually become Citicorp. He was a Morgan man. And his mother was Rosina Emmett, one of the best American portrait painters ever. Not just societal portraits, but presidential portraits, first ladies' portraits. She was actually the first woman to paint a president. And she comes from a long line of industrious artists. Lydia Emmett, her sister, Jane Emmett, her other sister, those three sisters probably put together most of America's earliest fine arts. You could see it both in the Newport Museum, the Rhode Island Museum of Fine Arts, the RISD Museum, MoMA. They were both, all of them were board members. So now you understand where Robert Emmett is coming from. He studied at the Fay School. He's a graduate of Milton Academy in Milton, Massachusetts, and he was a Harvard man, just like his father. And this is where both Robert and Bob met each other. Now, he served in World War I in the Canadian Black Watch, and he was wounded. Now, the one thing interesting about Robert Sherwood is he stood, what, 6'8"? I think it was 6'8". Okay, he was a gigantic man, and there was he and Robert Benchley would walk around the city, and I believe Benchley was 6'2", but he looked like he was 5'2" in comparison to Sherwood. I'm going to go to a little in depth about who he married. His first wife was Mary Brandon, and they had children, and they were married in 22, and they divorced in 34. Now, his second wife was Madeline Hurlock, very early silent movie actress and then talkie actress, and she was what was called the Laurel and Hardy girl. She was, if you ever watch Laurel and Hardy, she is the hottest babe in the film, and always one or the other is chasing after her. The interesting thing about Madeline is she was, as Carol had mentioned, they're grouped together. They share everything. Well, Mark Conley and Robert Sherwood shared a wife. Not simultaneously, but one after the other. And Madeline Hurlock was first married to Mark Conley. In 1919, he became a film critic. He became the first film critic, actually, to be hosted by Hollywood studios to go to California and actually meet the actors, actresses, and producers and directors and studio men. And he created a trend, okay, where the critic was no longer a man or woman on the outside looking in, but a man or woman on the inside looking at the inside and the operations. And the reason why is because he was, like Benchley, a gentle guy, but very firm. But unlike Benchley, he enjoyed his cocktails, which worked really well in Hollywood scene. So, and from 1919 to about 1940, he was very much anti-war. And I want to bring that up because you're going to see what all of his plays and all of his writings were pretty much anti-war at the time. So his first play was Road to Rome, 1927. And essentially it was about Hannibal's botched invasion of Rome. You remember Hannibal? We all studied ancient Roman history, where he brings the elephants to invade and sack Rome. Well, it was a dismal failure in some people's eyes. But he made an incredible funny out of the entire road to Rome. And then in 26, he wrote Silver Screen. 30, this is where he met Joan Harrison and Alfred Hitchcock, and he became intimates with Hitchcock and Harrison. And he really puts an effort into a majority of Hitchcock's early films. In 1930, he also meets Montgomery Clift and William Wilder. William Wilder, of course, is a cousin of Robert Sherwood's, but they had never met. What was interesting is that they fell in like brothers. Now remember, all during this time, he's at these luncheons, and he's hanging out in New York, and he's doing the bi-coastal thing that Carol just talked about. Now, how do I put this? He's doing very little. He's doing very little he's very actively participating in his writings, but he's not putting anything on. He's not putting anything in publishing hands at this particular point in time. So, in 1940-41, he becomes speechwriter for FDR. Now, I want you to understand, because of the Sherwood and Emmett connection, the Emmets were very involved in Democratic politics in New York State at the time, and they wanted their son to get a real job. And they figured, well, what the hell, speechwriter for the President of the United States? That's damn close. And then he became director of the Office of War Information. Now, this sounds strange, doesn't it? He was an anti-war guy. Now, all of a sudden, he's a pro-war guy. Now, from the period of 1919 to 1940, I'm sorry, from the period of 1927 to 1940, he had these huge bodies of work that needed to get published, and he wasn't really sure how he was going to get it done, and he didn't. And he was writing some articles for the New Yorker, of course, and writing some stuff for McClure's, because he was friends with the McClures, and he liked Condé Nast, but he hated Vanity Fair, and he was running in those circles because remember, Uh, he 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 had that family background. Um, so, anyways, he is he has a mild heart attack in '53. And, you know, he'd already written his critical pieces and his journalistic pieces, but he wanted to get his nonfiction pieces out. So he did. And so I'm going to talk about his life works. Did 2,000 plus, they're not quite sure, but 2,000 plus critical pieces for the two, like I said, McClure's New Yorker and the New York Times. Little over 4,000 journalistic pieces. He finalizes his 2 nonfiction pieces. He does 15 plays, and 9 of them adapted to film. This is his time in Hollywood. Now, he wins the Bancroft Award, 3 Pulitzers in drama, 1 Pulitzer in a biography, 1 Academy for Best Screenplay. Every single one of these people are leaving with what? An amazing amount of awards. So anyways, Sherwood dies November 4th, 1955 of a heart attack, which was his second heart attack. Took him down. Dies in, of course, New York. His wife, Madeline Hurlock Conley Sherwood, which was her name, and in the newspapers and society pages, she made sure that that's how it was written. Anyways, she dies April of 1989 in New York City in the same apartment which he passes away in. I'm going to go on and I'm going to talk about Marcus Conley because there's a very interesting connection, them sharing a wife together. Marcus Cook Conley, or as they known as Mark Conley. He was born in 1890 in Meeksport, Pennsylvania. And he was born to the actors class. His mom and dad were both actors. They were pre-vaudevillian. They were friends of the Luces and the Booths, and the Wilkses, excuse me. Patrick and Mabel Conley would travel around New York, and their favorite playhouse, I've lost my train of thought. You'll cut that out, right? Whew. All right. A little bit of noise there. Their favorite playhouse was the all right. I'll get back to that. So anyways, his father also owned a couple of small little hotels in the Pittsburgh community. And that's how they made their money and were able to travel around. His brother took care of them as the keeper. And but they were very early in stage acting. And they were actors with John Wilkes Booth and with the Luce brothers. So you understand that's a long period of time. And they would travel to Washington, D.C., Boston, New York, Philadelphia. So anyways, Marcus Conley started off, I mean, he went to school at the public schools in the Meeksport, Pennsylvania area. and ended up moving to Pittsburgh, the big city. And he was a journalist for the Pittsburgh Sun-Telegraph, and stayed, I don't know, about a year, maybe a year and a half, and immediately moved to New York and joined as a staff writer for the New York Times. As a journalist. Now, he was never a freelance writer. He wanted to always be a weekly paid staff writer. So he was a staff writer for Life magazine, for Everybody's magazine, for the New Yorker, and for Vanity Fair, which means he wrote weekly in these cases, and daily in the cases of the New Yorker. I mean, in New York Times. His famous quote is, "I always knew," and this is in reference to the people that he hung around with in the Algonquin round table. "I always knew that children were antisocial, but the children of the West Side are savages." So here it is, life's work. Acted in 21 films. Plays were a little over 1,000 plays. He appeared in, of those plays, 5 appeared on Broadway. He co-wrote 5 comedies with Kaufman. I believe 7 or 8 musicals. He co-directed, co-authored, and co-sketched 12. And one of them in 1922 called The 49ers, which has been replayed and remade, I don't know, probably every year since it was put together in 1922. He wrote 2 musical comedies, but not just wrote it, wrote the music, wrote the lyrics, wrote the back book for it. One of them was Helen of Troy, New York, and Be Yourself, also the books and the lyrics for that as well. He wrote The Green Pasture in 1930, and The Green Pasture was the only first all-black theater troupe. One memoir, Voices Off Stage, several hundred journalistic pieces, and 1 Pulitzer for drama. Active. What do these guys have in common? What do these guys have in common? Incredible amount of activity. Now, during this period of time, he was hanging out with the same group of people. He was very good friends with Jimmy Stewart. Okay? He loved playing cards, and he played cards with Jimmy Stewart. He was bi-coastal. And he was only married to Madeline Hurlock. Dorothy Parker, in her memoirs, talked about that he was somewhat asexual, if anybody's interested in the gossip of their sex lives. Because both Bob Sherwood and Robert Benchley were family guys, in some sense. I mean, of course, they screwed around, as everybody did, or does. But Mark Connelly was not that guy. I mean, he put himself out there in that way. But he wasn't that guy. I believe Martha's going to come up and talk a little bit about Sherwood and Connelly.
Tijan, this dreams were you.